We started using terms like unprecedented, the new normal, work from home, flatten the curve, social distance, and uncertainty to describe the impacts from COVID-19. We're going to hear from experts at NC State and listen to their opinion about coronavirus impacts on transportation and the economy. Transportation is about connectivity, and that connectivity has been disrupted by the coronavirus. We've seen historic drops in many modes of transportation, including airline passengers, transit usage, and our highways have seen huge drops in traffic volumes. Some modes, though, have seen increases. If we look at trucking within the freight industry, we're seeing increases in trucking in some locations as we try to keep the supply chain moving to get the goods needed to those who need to consume them. We've also seen increases in bicycling and pedestrian usage on some facilities as people leave their homes for exercise or to run local errands. And there are a lot of questions surrounding what's going to be a short-term impact versus a long-term impact. So what of these habits or patterns that we are currently experiencing will we carry forward? Will there be any long-term impacts on the modes that are used or how we use those transportation modes? And then there's a lot of interest in what shape this recovery is going to take. Will it be like a Nike swoosh where we had this sharp decline as the restrictions came into place, and then we'll see a gradual climb out as our economy and transportation recover? Will it be L-shaped, which would be a worst case scenario where we saw the sharp drop, and then as we reach the bottom, we remain there for an extended period of time? Will it be W-shaped, where we had the sharp drop, and then we'll start to see a climb out, and then if a second wave of coronavirus impacts occurs, we'll see a second drop before it climbs back to recovery mode? Or will it be the shape of a U, where we'll see the sharp drop and an extended period of decline, and then finally a return back to normal? Or will it be a V-shaped, which would be the ideal case where we saw the fast drop and then hopefully an equally rapid recovery and return back to normal operating conditions? So lots of questions exist, and only time will tell which situation we exist in, and we'll keep exploring these ideas together.
My name is Mike Walden. I'm a Reynolds Distinguished Professor and Economist at North Carolina State University, and I'm here to talk a little bit about what COVID-19 has meant for our transportation system in North Carolina. I'm actually also a member right now of a transportation commission set up by the governor and the General Assembly to look at future financing. So clearly, one thing we have seen during our COVID-19 crisis is a dramatic reduction in driving. With stay-at-home orders, people are not getting out and going about. And in North Carolina, as in most states, a large part, about half of the revenues for our transportation system that's used to build new roads, maintain existing roads, is from the state gas tax. And so one of the problems that we're going to see with respect to COVID-19 on transportation is revenues to the state transportation fund are going to take a big hit. Right now, the current estimate is they're down $300 million. And I expect that number is going to get bigger. So that's an issue that the commission I'm on, I think, will be taking a look at. And of course, the General Assembly, I think, will also look at in terms of what can be done, if anything, to replenish that fund over time. We have seen, of course, people driving less. Now, one upside of that has been an improvement in our environment, particularly with respect to pollution. So we can clearly see that tie between transportation and activity and pollution. Again, another issue. Another thing that I want to talk about, though, are some long-run implications, potentially, of COVID-19. And I think there are a couple major ones that do have impacts on transportation. You've heard of now a large number of people teleworking or telecommuting, as some say. We also have now seen people involved in teleeducating. I'm doing that. Many of my colleagues at NC State are doing that. And in fact, this has crept down to the K through 12 level. And we've also seen encouragement for people, so they don't overwhelm the medical system, to engage in telemedicine, where you contact a doctor via the internet. Big question is whether those behaviors will continue after the virus crisis goes away. If they do continue, and for example, more people work at home, if more students are educated while living at home, we could see actually a reduction in driving. And that has enormous implications for North Carolina in terms of how many roads we want to build and where we're going to build them. The last thing I want to talk about is that I do think the COVID-19 crisis may have an impact on where people want to live. We have seen during this crisis that the virus, which is very contagious, has spread most in metropolitan areas. That should stand to reason because people are higher density there, people are packed closer together, and the virus has spread more in big cities. We see that in terms of North Carolina with our urban counties having larger numbers. What we may see people consider in the future is whether they want to continue to live in a big city or do they want to perhaps move to a smaller town or rural area where if we have another pandemic down the road, they won't be as exposed. And if we do see advances in the ability of people to work from home, students to be educated from home, you engage in various services like medical care via the internet, that may allow people to perhaps look at living in small towns and rural areas. And of course, in North Carolina, like most states, we have had what's called an urban-rural divide, where the big growth, economic growth, has been in cities, less so in small towns and rural areas. We may see this crisis change that. And that obviously has big implications for transportation and road building. So I think the bottom line here is that we already knew that transportation was changing in many, many ways with ride sharing, et cetera, mass transit. I think the COVID-19 virus crisis has added another element that could impact transportation, and decision makers are going to have to take that into account in the future. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Kai Monast, and I'm the director of the Public Transportation Group at NC State's Institute for Transportation Research and Education, as well as the interim director of the School Planning and Transportation Group. I know it's hard, but let's think about the positive aspects of mobility that we have been gifted during this event. One of the biggest differences I've seen is people, humans, actually enjoying being in the street. During our prolonged quarantine, the decrease in automobile traffic and increase in pedestrian and bicyclist use of roadways has led to an informal reclaim the street movement. It wasn't intentional, it just happened because the street was no longer being dominated by cars. The sharp decline in vehicle traffic made people feel safer using the street for mobility, recreation, and play. For many of us, this was the first time in our lives that we realized the car may be an unwelcome guest in our neighborhoods because it was outnumbered by pedestrians, bicyclists, and families looking for open space to relax and play. Instead of accepting tons of metal hurrying down the street, we begin questioning why it is there. What is its destination? Is its purpose truly essential? At some point, while enjoying the street, you may have thought, why should I be forced to give way for this machine? Shouldn't this machine give way to us? Once we find ourselves asking those questions, it opens up possibilities that many of us have never had the luxury of considering. The street is a public good. It is publicly owned, but is often reserved for a single purpose and unavailable for the activities that you're doing right now. How can we reclaim the street moving forward? For example, instead of parking vehicles at home, should we park around major roads and walk, cycle, or use golf carts for finishing the trip? Now that we've seen what human-centered street life can be, I'm curious if we as a society will truly want to go back to normal. If you have been enjoying the street lately, let's find a way to use this quarantine to make our neighborhoods better.
Hello, my name is Heidi Schweizer, and I'm an economist at North Carolina State University. I study transportation markets. You may have been hearing a lot about logistics, and today what I'm going to discuss is what's happening in the trucking industry during the coronavirus pandemic. Right here is a graph that shows truck rates in the southeast region for dry vans since 2014. And these data come from truckstop.com, which is a major load board and load tracking provider for the industry. So dry vans are simply very common trailers. You've probably seen thousands of them on the highway. And the southeast region includes us here in North Carolina. So there's a couple things you might notice about this graph. The first is that rates as of mid-April are at their lowest point since 2014. The second thing you might notice is that truck rates can vary a lot. As of mid-April 2020, rates were about $1.50 per mile. But just 18 months ago, rates were as high as $3 per mile. So why might rates be low right now, especially with all the news about the logistics sector? Well, there's both supply side and demand side contributors. On the supply side, we think about the costs that firms that supply trucking services face. On the fixed costs, that can include equipment, it can also include distribution facilities. But when it comes to variable costs, the main variable costs are going to be labor, maintenance, insurance, and fuel. Well, fuel prices are very low right now. And also, there's faster transit times. So a single truck can cover more miles or do more trips per day because there's less traffic on the roads, and for certain products, there's a suspension of the hours of service rules. If we consider the demand side, then it's important to know that the demand for trucking services is really derived demand. It comes from the demand for goods ultimately. So when it comes to medical supplies and consumer staples, certainly there's been increased transportation demand for those types of products. But overall, manufacturing and industrial sectors have significantly reduced production, so overall demand for trucking services has fallen. Those two factors put together is what really contributes to the low prices right now. And what this means is that some firms may decide to park trucks in the short run if they can't cover their costs at the current rates, or if the low rates persist, some of them may sell equipment or even exit the industry.
Hi there. My name is Steve Bert. I'm a research associate at the Institute for Transportation Research and Education. You've heard from a number of us already on the coronavirus and how it's impacting the way we commute or how we transport our goods. But I'd like to talk about how COVID-19 is changing our leisure travel. As of Wednesday, May 6th, 217 countries and territories worldwide have imposed travel restrictions. Nearly 100 countries have partially or fully closed their borders, 65 have suspended flights, and the rest of the 217 countries have imposed case-specific travel measures. And the real kicker is, our domestic getaways have gotten away from us. Instead of spending a month in the Grand Canyon, taking a rafting tour on the Colorado River, I'm spending time in North Carolina walking circles around my neighborhood. Yeah, the flowers are more beautiful this year than in years past, but that doesn't fulfill my itch to travel or see the Milky Way at night. According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, North America is projected to lose more than 7 million tourism jobs in 2020, while we can expect to lose 100 million tourism jobs worldwide. Yeah, compared to this time last year, hotels are hosting less travelers and earning less revenue per room. According to STR Analytics, 23 of the top 25 hotel markets have experienced declines in revenue per available room. Yep, ending on a note of gloom and doom. Have you played Gloomhaven or Doom? Gaming, online gaming, seems to be a refuge during this COVID-19 period, and also a growth industry during hard times. Video game sales have increased to over 10 billion worldwide, and just looking at the increase from March 16th to March 22nd, video game sales have increased 63% globally. While games like Valorant, League of Legends, and Fortnite are taking their moments in the spotlight.
This is Jason Coupet, Assistant Professor of Public Administration at NC State. Hello, everyone. My thoughts are with everybody in all of our communities trying to move past COVID, both with regard to the transportation, but overall community impacts that this virus has caused us all. I think as well as other researchers, both at NC State and across the country and internationally across the globe, are thinking carefully about the ways that we need to make sure that we center not just the ways that goods and services are transported throughout the economy and the implications that COVID has, but to remind ourselves that the reasons that economics is important to transportation is because transportation is people-centered, right? We need to think carefully. The reason that we think carefully about efficiency and safety and speed and planning is because we want to make sure our communities are taken care of to the best that they can be. This is particularly true for our most vulnerable communities, those who most need access to transportation and the goods and services that are critical to their daily needs. We also need to be centering the needs of transportation workers, those folks who are on the front lines helping the provision of those services. Lastly, I know I'm thinking about, and I know other researchers and planners are thinking about nationally, the ways that transportation is integral to public health, right? The ways that those two things are tied together. That the health of our communities is and should be important to transportation planning agencies, both with regard to measurement and planning, but then the reciprocal as well, the ways that transportation is integral to public health. Thinking about the way food is delivered, meals are delivered, goods and services get to communities, how kids get to school, how you get to work, really making sure that we know that all of those are health issues, and then health issues are transportation issues. So I hope everyone is safe and maintaining as you hunker down with your families and loved ones. Wish you all the best. Go Pack.
Hello, I'm Aaron Hipp. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management, as well as a fellow at our Center for Geospatial Analytics at NC State. I've been thinking a fair amount about transportation, the economy, and policy as we've been home during these stay-at-home orders related to COVID-19, and as we think about returning to some type of normal or being able to get away from our houses a little more in the coming weeks and over the summer. I think specifically I've been thinking about our complete street policies and what this means for active transportation. Is this an opportunity to really work with our legislatures, with our municipalities to expand complete street policies? So when we think of the streets and think of our transportation networks, it's not primarily cars, but we're considering walking, bicycling, and public transportation. I think this is a great opportunity. Many cities across the US and across the world are opening their streets for people to be active so that they can go out and stay 6 feet apart. But this is not in a park, which folks may not have access to, certainly not out their front door. But opening these spaces now that there's a reduction in vehicular traffic. How can we continue open streets? They've occurred in Bogota for 30 or 40 years. They've been around the US, over 100 cities have hosted one, but they've been one-off events. How can these become programs or policy? I think also related is speed limit. I live in a residential neighborhood with 3 children, and the speed limit is 25 miles per hour, but people don't go 25 miles per hour. There's plenty of research showing that the injury rate, the fatality and severe injury rate is greatly reduced when a person is hit by a car going 25 miles per hour or less versus going 35 miles per hour or greater. So this is another opportunity to work with cities and policy to reduce speed limits, not just around schools, right? It's always kind of funny that the speed limit around schools is 25 miles per hour, but that's not the only place children are. That's not the only place our grandparents are. So why not expand where 25 mile per hour speed limits are the rule, are the policy? And finally, related to economics, one saying I heard several years ago related to open streets and related to increasing active transportation is that when you're walking and biking, you're not sitting on your wallet. But when you're sitting in your car, you're sitting on your wallet. And so when folks are moving at a slower speed, when they're really in their local neighborhood and local economy, their wallet's in their back pocket and they're more likely to spend that money. And I think this is another opportunity coming out of our stay-at-home orders to capture the return to the local economy. Thank you. I hope everyone's staying safe and well, and I look forward to passing you by walking on the streets.
Hello, my name is Weston Head, and I am an economic analyst at the Institute for Transportation Research and Education here at NC State University. As everyone across the state has been stuck at home during the COVID-19 crisis, the market has seen significant changes in consumer behavior compared to pre-pandemic. Since going out in public is now considered a more risky activity, home delivery services have seen a significant increase in business as people are choosing to do their shopping from the comfort and safety of their own homes instead of going out in public. Even as U.S. consumer retail spending was down 8.7% in the month of March compared year over year, consumer online spending increased during that same time period. Amazon, for example, saw a 26% increase in their quarter-one revenue compared to last year, as well as a 29% increase in Amazon Prime memberships. Grocery delivery services, such as Instacart, Walmart Grocery, and Shipt, have seen their daily app downloads increase over 100 to 200% during the COVID-19 crisis. Third-party food delivery services, such as Grubhub and Uber Eats, have seen increases from 7 to even 72% year over year for the month of March compared to last year. Meal kit delivery services, such as Blue Apron, and HelloFresh, and Home Chef, have reported an increase in consumer demand and have increased their production and hirings in an attempt to keep up. So the question is, all of these changes that have been adopted during the COVID-19 crisis, will they remain in place once the threat of the virus has decreased? Will people continue to have their groceries, food, and goods delivered to their homes, or will things return to the way they were pre-COVID-19? Will people consider these new things as normal, as people enjoy not having to go to the store for these things? If so, what will be the long-term impacts that this will have on people's travel behavior, the need for physical storefronts, and even the way that we set up our cities today?
Hi, my name is Harrison Fell, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. Today I'm going to talk to you briefly about how the pandemic has affected global oil markets. As many of you may have heard, oil prices have really tanked in 2020. They started the year at around $60 a barrel, and now we're closer to $30. So what are the causes for this? Well, it's pretty apparent. On the demand side, the shelter-at-home restrictions have really caused a drop in demand. And on the supply side, earlier in the year, the Russians and Saudi Arabia were engaged in a price war which vastly increased oil supplies. So a big negative oil demand shock plus a big positive oil supply shock leads to a massive drop in prices. Where will things go from here? Well, on the supply side, the big oil-producing countries have already decided to cut production. Domestically, we'll also see a cut in production as companies stop drilling new wells and likely shut in some of the less profitable wells. This will cause upward pressure on prices. On the demand side, while the restrictions remain in place, we'll still see demand low. And this will likely continue even after restrictions are lifted as economies slowly dig themselves out of this hole. What will also be interesting to see is, over the coming years, does this pandemic change the preferences for travel for individuals? Do we learn that our home offices work as well as going into our central office? Do we learn that Zoom meetings work as well as in-person meetings? Or does all of this experience just reinforce the way we have already done business? This remains to be seen, but will be something interesting to keep our eye on for the coming years.